At exactly 2:13 p.m. on May 19, 2026, a violent explosion ripped across the Black Sea, 54 nautical miles southwest of Sevastopol. A Russian Project 22160 patrol ship had just destroyed an unidentified surface contact with its AK-176MA naval gun. The target was unmanned, and it was not alone. Seconds later, the frigate Admiral Essen detected 63 low-profile contacts approaching from 3 directions. Explosive-laden Ukrainian uncrewed surface vessels were racing over the waves at more than 40 knots, their dark hulls nearly invisible against the sea. Above them, 36 fixed-wing drones descended below 200 feet. Some carried small warheads. Others were electronic decoys designed to imitate larger aircraft on Russian radar. The Russian formation immediately went to general quarters. At its center was the Volga Meridian, a military-chartered transport carrying fuel, replacement radar modules, and air defense missiles bound for Crimea. Protecting it were Admiral Essen, 2 patrol ships, and a minesweeper. If that transport reached Sevastopol, Russian forces could sustain another month of intensive operations. If Ukraine sank it, the logistical impact would be immediate. Inside a concealed command center near Odessa, Ukrainian operators watched 99 green symbols converge on the convoy. This was Operation Night Trident, the largest coordinated Ukrainian naval drone assault attempted in this fictional conflict. But the attack was more sophisticated than the Russians initially understood. The drones were not moving as one mass. They were divided into independent cells, using burst transmissions, inertial navigation, satellite positioning, and electro-optical terminal guidance. Destroy one control link, and the others would continue. Time to impact: 9 minutes. At 11:40 a.m., Russian technicians recovered the remains of an aerial drone from the transport's deck. Inside its damaged memory module, they discovered recognition files containing silhouettes not only of Black Sea Fleet vessels, but also of ships stationed hundreds of kilometers away. The attack had not been designed solely for this convoy. It had been collecting combat data for a much larger autonomous campaign. This fictional battle reveals the brutal reality of modern naval warfare. Electronic warfare can break a swarm's coordination, but it cannot guarantee that every autonomous weapon will stop. Once machines can navigate, recognize targets, and continue without human commands, jamming becomes only one layer of defense. So what would you choose? Invest in more expensive warships, or thousands of cheap autonomous drones capable of overwhelming them? Comment below, because the next battle in the Black Sea may not be decided by the largest missile. It may be decided by the machine that Moscow
keeps moving
announced
after every
that a major
signal
enemy
disappears.
attack had been completely repelled. Kyiv claimed that a critical Russian logistics convoy had been forced to retreat. Both statements contained part of the truth. Ukraine had failed to destroy its primary target. Russia had failed to deliver the supplies. Tactically, the swarm had been defeated. Strategically, the convoy's mission had still been disrupted. But the battle produced an even more dangerous consequence. Throughout the engagement, Ukrainian and NATO passive sensors had recorded every Russian jamming frequency, pulse pattern, and response cycle. By activating its full electronic warfare architecture, Russia had protected the convoy, but it had also exposed the electronic fingerprint of one of its most valuable defensive networks. The next swarm would be programmed with that information. Russia understood this immediately. Within hours, naval commanders began changing frequencies, relocating coastal transmitters, and rewriting electronic defense procedures. However, every modification created new vulnerabilities. More powerful jamming could protect warships, but it could also disrupt Russian navigation, civilian shipping, and friendly communications. The Black Sea had become a contest between adaptation cycles. Ukraine would build cheaper drones with better inertial navigation and improved machine vision. Russia would deploy stronger jammers, helicopter interceptors, physical barriers, and automated gun systems. Each attack would train the next defense. Each defense would help design the next attack. And there was still one unresolved threat. At 2:27 a.m., it surfaced unexpectedly 300 meters behind the transport. Its guidance system had accumulated too much navigational error, causing it to rise short of the intended impact point. A Russian boarding team raced toward it in a rigid-hull inflatable boat. If the drone could be captured intact, its sensors and navigation computer could expose the architecture of Ukraine's autonomous system. But as the team approached, a warning light began flashing on the drone's stern. The vehicle had initiated a delayed self-destruct sequence. The Russian boat came alongside. 2 sailors secured a tow line while the others covered the damaged machine. They had no time to disarm it. Their only option was to drag it away from the transport before it exploded. 90 seconds remained. The inflatable accelerated, towing the drone through the burning debris field. The unstable craft rolled violently, threatening to pull the Russian team into the water. At 600 meters, the tow line was released. The boarding boat turned away as the drone detonated. A wall of water rose behind it, briefly swallowing the craft from view. Seconds later, it emerged damaged but still moving. Operation Night Trident was over. Ukraine had launched 99 drones. Most had been destroyed, diverted, or disabled. One Russian patrol ship had lost steering. The transport was burning and no longer capable of reaching Sevastopol without assistance. Russia's electronic warfare had prevented a massacre, but it had not delivered a clean victory. By sunrise, Admiral Essen was escorting the damaged convoy east toward Novorossiysk. The Volga Meridian remained afloat, but its cargo could no longer reach Crimea on schedule. The disabled patrol ship was under tow, and Russian helicopters were searching the debris field for recoverable Ukrainian technology. The Russian helicopter moved to intercept, firing into the lead craft. It exploded, throwing burning fragments across the sea. Admiral Essen destroyed the second with a burst from its main gun. The final drone disappeared inside the smoke. For 12 seconds, nobody could see it. Then the transport's crew heard an engine screaming along the starboard side. The drone emerged less than 200 meters away, heading directly for the ship's engine room. The transport had no close-in weapon system. Its sailors opened fire with rifles and heavy machine guns. Rounds tore into the Ukrainian drone, damaging its camera and punching through the forward hull. But autonomous guidance maintained the final course. At 2:25 a.m., the drone struck the Volga Meridian just above the waterline. A shaped charge detonated against the outer plating. The explosion opened a compartment near the auxiliary machinery room, ruptured fuel lines, and started a fire deep inside the ship. Emergency lighting failed. Smoke filled the lower passageways. The transport immediately slowed from 14 knots to 4, but it remained afloat. At the same moment, Russian sonar regained contact with the two Ukrainian submersible drones. Because they were operating below the surface and relying primarily on inertial guidance, the electronic warfare screen had not diverted them as effectively as the surface swarm. One was approaching Admiral Essen. The second was heading for the damaged transport. The minesweeper launched acoustic countermeasures while Russian crews fired anti-saboteur charges into the water. The first underwater contact vanished in a violent pressure pulse. The second
Admiral
kept
Essen's
moving. Captain immediately ordered smoke deployment and maximum defensive fire. Thick clouds spread across the convoy, hiding the ships from optical seekers. Searchlights swept across the water while machine guns fired at anything that moved. A Ka-29 naval helicopter descended over the formation and began tracking the surface drones with infrared sensors. Its crew transmitted target positions directly to the escort ships through a hardened line-of-sight network. One drone exploded under cannon fire. A second struck floating debris and detonated early. A third became trapped in the wake of the transport and capsized. But 11 were still coming. At 2:24 a.m., two aerial drones dove toward Admiral Essen's radar mast. The frigate's AK-630 system engaged the first, shredding it less than 400 meters away. The second passed through the debris cloud and detonated above the superstructure. The small warhead did not cripple the ship, but fragments damaged an electro-optical director and severed an external communications array. Simultaneously, 4 surface drones attacked the port escort. The Russian patrol ship turned directly toward them, reducing its visible profile. Its main gun destroyed one. Crew-served weapons hit another. The third detonated prematurely after colliding with the wreckage. The fourth struck the stern. The explosion tore through the steering compartment, jammed the rudder, and forced the patrol ship into a slow, uncontrolled turn. Black smoke poured from its rear deck as damage control teams raced below. The convoy's western flank was now open. 5 Ukrainian drones immediately shifted toward the Volga Meridian using only onboard visual recognition. Smoke confused 2 of them, sending both toward the frigate instead. But 3 correctly identified the transport's towering rectangular silhouette. Distance, 1,600 Within
meters.
30 seconds, 18 Ukrainian surface drones veered off course. 7 began circling after their navigation computers received conflicting data. 12 aerial drones lost synchronization and arrived individually, allowing Russian guns to destroy them one by one. The swarm had been fractured. Inside the Ukrainian command center, operators attempted to restore contact using frequency-hopping data links. The drones shifted channels hundreds of times per second, searching for gaps in the Russian interference. The gaps vanished almost immediately. Russian electronic support systems detected each new transmission and concentrated jamming energy against it. Ukraine was not fighting a wall of static. It was fighting an adaptive electronic defense network. At 2:21 am, the first attack appeared to collapse. More than half of the surface drones were no longer following valid intercept courses. The aerial formation had been reduced to scattered contacts, and both submersible drones had lost external navigation updates. Russian commanders believed the convoy had survived. But Operation Night Trident had been designed around one critical assumption. Communications would eventually fail. The surviving Ukrainian drones activated autonomous fallback mode. Satellite receivers were isolated. External command links shut down. From that moment, each machine navigated using inertial sensors, stored sea maps, and onboard cameras trained to recognize the silhouettes of Russian vessels. The drones could no longer coordinate as a single intelligence, but they could still hunt independently. On Ukrainian screens, most telemetry disappeared. Operators were now spectators, unable to redirect or recall the weapons they had launched. At 0222 hours, thermal cameras aboard Admiral Essen detected 14 drones emerging from the interference. They were no longer transmitting. Russia's electronic warfare had blinded the swarm, but it had also made the surviving drones silent. At 2:19 am, one Ukrainian surface craft penetrated the outer screen and accelerated toward the minesweeper. Russian sailors engaged it with machine gun fire, but the rounds skipped across the water or punched harmlessly through the bow. The drone detonated 20 meters from the ship. The blast did not breach the hull, but the pressure wave shattered windows, damaged communications antennas, and knocked 3 sailors from their stations. The minesweeper lost formation and began turning away. That was the opening Ukraine had been waiting for. 22 surface drones immediately redirected toward the exposed transport. Then, without warning, their satellite navigation signals disappeared. Across the convoy, Russian electronic warfare antennas had activated simultaneously. A coastal Pole 21 million network, shipboard TK-25 countermeasure suites, and a helicopter-mounted jammer began flooding the battle space with interference. On the Ukrainian command screens, the swarm's smooth green tracks froze. Then they scattered. Russia had just turned the Black Sea into an electronic maze. This was not a fictional electromagnetic pulse capable of magically destroying electronics. It was something more realistic and more dangerous. Russia was attacking the information that allowed the swarm to function. The Pole 21 million network denied satellite navigation across a wide section of the sea. Shipboard systems generated broadband interference against Ukrainian control links. At the same time, false positioning signals began pulling individual drones away from the convoy. A drone believing it was 500 meters east of its real location would miss by 500 meters. At 40 knots, that error was enough to turn a precision weapon into drifting wreckage. At 2:15 a.m., the first aerial decoys entered the frigate's defensive envelope. Admiral Essen launched 2 Still-1 surface-to-air missiles. White fire erupted from the vertical cells, illuminating the convoy. Both targets vanished, but the missiles had struck decoys. Ukraine had just forced the Russian formation to activate every major radar and reveal the exact position of every escort. The real swarm was still approaching at wave-top height. Time to impact: 9 minutes. The Ukrainian strategy was ruthless. The aerial drones would overload Russian surveillance radars while the surface craft attacked from opposite bearings. Several drones were programmed to target propulsion and steering systems rather than the center of the hull. Ukraine did not need to sink every ship, it only needed to immobilize the escorts and open a corridor to the transport. At 2:17 a.m., the Russian Combat Information Center became a wall of flashing tracks. Radar operators reported drones from the west. Electro-optical cameras detected surface vessels from the south. Seconds later, passive sensors identified additional control signals from the northwest. Simultaneously, Russian sonar detected 2 slow-moving contacts beneath the surface. Ukraine had added submersible drones to the attack, creating a threat from the air, the surface, and below the waterline. This was not a raid, it was a layered kill chain. Admiral Essen turned hard to starboard, placing itself between the swarm and the transport. Its A190 naval gun opened fire, launching programmable airburst rounds toward the incoming aerial drones. The 2 patrol ships activated their AK-630 close-in weapon systems, filling the darkness with thousands of 30mm rounds. Several drones disintegrated, others continued. At 20 meters from the ship,